I agreed to marry a man I did not love because I believed safety could be built on reason, not feeling. I was wrong about many things that autumn, but most of all, I was wrong to think the dead would let us be. My name is Eleanor Hartwell, and I am the daughter of a disgraced man. My father took his own life 3 years ago in the library of our London townhouse, leaving behind debts, whispers, and a daughter no respectable family would receive. I was 20 then, and I am 23 now, which in the eyes of society makes me nearly unmarriageable, a creature of diminished value whose only hope is to fade quietly into obscurity or accept whatever offer might salvage the ruins of her name. The offer came in the form of Nathaniel Ashford, Viscount Ashford, a man of 35 with a title, a fortune, and a dead wife whose memory hung over him like fog over the Thames. We met precisely 3 times before the betrothal was announced. The first meeting occurred in the drawing room of my aunt's house in Mayfair, where I had been living as a kind of charity case, tolerated but never truly welcomed. He arrived punctually at 4 in the afternoon, tall and immaculate in a black morning coat, his dark hair touched with silver at the temples, his face all sharp angles and restrained politeness. He did not smile. He assessed me the way one might assess a piece of furniture, determining whether it would suit the room, and I returned the courtesy, noting the coldness in his gray eyes, the tightness around his mouth, the way he held himself as though braced against some invisible wind. We spoke of practical matters. He required a wife to manage his household and restore a semblance of normalcy to Ashford Manor, which had been shuttered and silent since the death of his first wife 2 years prior. I required respectability, security, and escape from the suffocating pity of distant relations. It was a transaction, clean and unsentimental, and I told myself that was preferable to the illusions other women clung to. Love, I had learned, was a luxury I could not afford. The second meeting took place at a gallery exhibition, a public appearance meant to signal our understanding to those who made it their business to observe such things. He stood beside me in front of a landscape painting, and we exchanged comments about the composition, the light, the artist's technique. His voice was low and even, and he did not once touch my arm or lean close in the manner of a man courting affection. When he left me at my aunt's door that evening, he bowed stiffly and said he hoped I had found the afternoon agreeable. I said I had, though in truth I had found it cold and hollow, like standing in an empty church. The third meeting was at his London residence, a grand but somber house in Belgrave Square, where I was introduced to the housekeeper and shown the rooms I would occupy as his wife. He walked beside me through corridors lined with portraits of Ashford ancestors, their painted eyes following us with what seemed like disapproval, and he explained the household routines with the detachment of a man reading from a legal document. I remember the scent of beeswax and old wood, the heaviness of the draperies, the way my footsteps echoed on the marble floors. I remember thinking that I would be very alone here, even after the wedding. And I remember the moment we passed a door at the end of the second-floor hallway, and he paused, just for a heartbeat before moving on. I did not ask what lay behind it. I already knew. It was her room, Isabel's room. The betrothal dinner was held 3 weeks later at Ashford Manor itself, a sprawling estate in the countryside of Sussex, grey stone and ivy, and windows that reflected the autumn sky like dead eyes. My aunt accompanied me, along with a small party of relatives and acquaintances who had decided that my match with Lord Ashford was sufficiently respectable to warrant their attendance. The manor smelled of damp earth and extinguished candles, and though fires had been lit in every grate, the cold seemed to rise from the stones themselves, settling into my bones. Nathaniel greeted us in the entrance hall with perfect courtesy, but I noticed the shadows beneath his eyes, the way his hand trembled slightly when he took mine. I told myself it was the strain of opening the house again, of facing the memories that lived in every corner. The dinner was formal and interminable, course after course of rich food I could barely taste, conversation that skimmed the surface of everything and touched nothing real. Nathaniel sat at the head of the table, I at his right, and between us stretched a distance that no amount of polite speech could bridge. It was during the 5th course, a roasted pheasant accompanied by root vegetables and a dark wine sauce, that it happened. Nathaniel had been reaching for his wine glass, his expression distant, when he suddenly froze. His hand hovered in midair, fingers curling as though grasping at something invisible. The color drained from his face, and his eyes, those cool gray eyes, went dark and wide, the pupils swallowing the iris until they looked like tunnels into some lightless place. The table fell silent. Someone, my aunt perhaps, asked if he was unwell, but Nathaniel did not answer. He turned his head slowly, unnaturally, until he was looking directly at me, and when his lips moved, the voice that emerged was not his own. It was a woman's voice, soft and venomous, edged with sorrow and rage. It said, "You are not my bride." I felt the air leave my lungs. Around me, the guests stirred in confusion, some half rising from their seats, but I could not move. I could only stare at the man who was supposed to become my husband, whose mouth shaped words in a cadence that did not belong to him, whose gaze held mine with an intensity that burned. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, it ended. Nathaniel blinked, gasped, and his eyes cleared. He looked around the table in bewilderment, his hand still frozen in the air, and I watched the horror dawn on his face as he realized something had occurred, though he did not seem to know what. The silence stretched unbearably until the housekeeper, a thin woman with iron-gray hair, stepped forward and suggested Lord Ashford had taken ill, that the strain of the evening had been too much, that he should retire and rest. He did not argue. He rose unsteadily, murmured an apology, and left the dining room with the butler's support. The guests erupted into whispers, speculating about fatigue, about grief, about the poor man's fragile constitution. But I said nothing. I sat very still, my hands folded in my lap, and felt the cold of the manor seep deeper into my skin, because I knew what I had heard. I knew it was not exhaustion or illness or imagination. I had heard a woman's voice speak through Nathaniel Ashford's lips, and I had heard what she said. "You are not my bride." The words echoed in my mind long after the guests departed, long after I was shown to my room in the east wing, long after the house fell silent and the darkness pressed against the windows. I lay awake that night, staring at the canopy above my bed, and wondered who Isabel Ashford had been in life, and what she had become in death. I wondered if she was still here, in this house, watching and waiting. And I wondered, with a chill that had nothing to do with the cold air, whether I had agreed to marry a man who was not truly free, a man who might never be mine because he still belonged, body and soul, to the woman who had died. Sleep did not come easily. When it finally did, I dreamed of fog and whispers and a woman's pale hand reaching through the dark. I did not see Nathaniel the following morning. The housekeeper, Mrs. Graves, informed me at breakfast that his lordship had departed before dawn for London on urgent business, and that he sent his apologies for the abruptness of his departure. She said it with the careful neutrality of a woman who had learned not to question her employer's actions, but I saw the tightness around her mouth, the way her hands gripped the silver coffee pot just a fraction too firmly. She knew something was wrong. Perhaps she had always known. My aunt insisted we leave immediately, scandalized by what she called Nathaniel's appalling lapse in propriety, but I asked for one more day. I claimed fatigue from the journey, though in truth I could not leave without understanding what had happened in that dining room. She reluctantly agreed, departing with the other guests in a flurry of loaded trunks and whispered speculations, leaving me alone in Ashford Manor with only the servants and the silence. The house felt different without the buffer of other people. The corridors stretched longer, the shadows pooled deeper in the corners, and every creak of settling wood made me turn sharply, half expecting to see someone standing behind me. I told myself it was merely the unfamiliarity of the place, the natural unease of being a guest in a house still mourning its mistress. But I knew better. I had heard that voice. I had seen Nathaniel's eyes go black and empty. Something lived here that should not, something that refused to rest. I spent the morning exploring the public rooms, trying to understand the woman who had once presided over this household. The drawing room was elegant but austere, decorated in shades of deep blue and silver, with furniture that looked expensive but uncomfortable. There were no personal touches, no needlework left casually on a chair, no book opened and set aside. It was as though Isabel had been erased, or perhaps had never truly inhabited these spaces at all. The only portrait of her hung in the gallery, a formal painting that showed a young woman with pale blonde hair and a remote expression, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes fixed on something beyond the viewer's sight. She had been beautiful in the way of carved marble, cold and perfect and untouchable. In the afternoon, I walked the grounds despite the chill wind that swept across the gardens, stripping the last leaves from the trees. The estate was extensive, rolling lawns giving way to dense woodland, and at the far edge of the property stood a small chapel, old and ivy-covered, its windows dark. I approached it slowly, drawn by a curiosity I could not name, and found the door unlocked. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of stone and decay. Dust covered the pews, and the altar cloth had faded to a dingy gray. But there, in the corner near the vestry door, I found something that made my breath catch. Fresh flowers, white roses, their petals still soft, arranged in a crystal vase that gleamed as though recently polished. Someone had been here, and recently. I reached out to touch one of the blooms, and my fingers came away damp. The card tucked among the stems bore no signature, only a single word written in an elegant feminine hand. Forgive. I left the chapel quickly, my heart beating too fast, and returned to the manor as the afternoon light began to fail. Mrs. Graves was lighting the lamps in the entrance hall when I came in, and I asked her, as casually as I could manage, whether anyone tended the chapel. She looked at me for a long moment before answering, and I saw something flicker in her eyes, something that might have been warning or fear. "No one goes there, miss," she said quietly. "Not since the mistress died. His lordship had it closed." "Then who placed the flowers?" I asked. She did not answer. She simply turned and walked away, her footsteps echoing down the corridor, and I was left standing in the gathering dusk with more questions than before. That evening, I dined alone in the small breakfast room, unable to bear the thought of sitting at that long table where Nathaniel had spoken in a voice not his own. Afterward, I retreated to the library, hoping to distract myself with a book, but found instead a room that clearly served as Nathaniel's private sanctuary. His desk stood before the window, its surface covered with papers and correspondence, and the shelves were filled with volumes on law, agriculture, and natural philosophy. It was the room of a practical man, a man concerned with the management of estates and the responsibilities of his position. There was no poetry, no novels, nothing to suggest a life of feeling or imagination. I should not have looked. I knew it was a violation of his privacy, a betrayal of the trust implicit in our arrangement. But I could not stop myself. I opened the desk drawer and found what I was seeking without even knowing I had been seeking it. A bundle of letters tied with black ribbon, addressed to Nathaniel in the same elegant hand I had seen on the card in the chapel. Isabel's hand. I took them to the chair by the fire and read them one by one, and with each page the woman in the portrait became something more complex and terrible than I had imagined. The early letters were filled with the kind of affection expected of a new wife, dutiful expressions of devotion and inquiries about his health and business. But as the dates progressed, the tone changed. She wrote of loneliness, of feeling abandoned in this vast house while he spent weeks in London. She wrote of strange dreams, of voices she heard in the night, of the certainty that someone watched her from the shadows. She begged him to come home. She begged him to see her, truly see her. And in the final letters, written in the weeks before her death, the handwriting grew erratic, the sentences disjointed, and the pleas turned to accusations. "You do not love me," she wrote. "You never did. You married me for my fortune and left me here to rot. I am nothing to you. I am less than nothing. And when I am gone, you will not even mourn me properly. You will find another, someone more suitable, someone who asks less of you. But I will not let you forget me, Nathaniel. I will not let you replace me so easily." The last letter was dated 3 days before her death. It contained only one line, written in a hand so shaky it was barely legible. "I cannot bear this any more." I sat there as the fire burned low, the letters spread across my lap, and felt a grief so profound it surprised me. I had not known Isabel Ashford. I had agreed to take her place without ever considering her as a real woman with real suffering. But she had been real. She had been lonely and desperate and forgotten, and she had died believing herself unloved. And now she was something else, something that would not rest, something that spoke through the man who had failed her. I understood then why she had said those words at the dinner table. "You are not my bride." Because I was taking what she believed was hers, stepping into a role she had died trying to fill, and she would not allow it. She would not be replaced. Not by me. Not by anyone. I was still sitting there, lost in these dark thoughts, when I heard it. Footsteps in the hallway, slow and deliberate, moving toward the library door. I looked up, expecting Mrs. Graves or perhaps one of the maids, but the doorway remained empty. The footsteps stopped just beyond the threshold, and I felt the temperature in the room drop sharply, my breath misting in the air. The fire flickered and dimmed, and for a moment I could have sworn I saw a shadow move across the wall, the silhouette of a woman in a long dress, her head bowed, her hands clasped before her. Then the fire roared back to life, and the shadow was gone. But the letters in my lap felt suddenly heavier, and I knew with absolute certainty that I was not alone in that room. Isabel was here. She was watching, and she was waiting to see what I would do. I gathered the letters carefully and returned them to the desk drawer, my hands shaking. As I closed the drawer, my eyes fell on a leather journal half hidden beneath a stack of ledgers. I pulled it free and opened it to find Nathaniel's writing, a private record of the months following Isabel's death. The entries were sparse and haunted, filled with guilt and self-recrimination. He wrote of finding her in the chapel, cold and still, a bottle of laudanum empty beside her. He wrote of the inquest, the whispers of suicide, the shame that clung to the family name. And he wrote of the sounds he heard at night, footsteps in empty rooms, doors opening and closing, the scent of her perfume lingering in the air long after it should have faded. "I am being punished," he had written, "and I deserve it." I closed the journal and left the library, climbing the stairs to my room with the sense that I was being followed, that if I turned quickly enough, I would catch a glimpse of pale blonde hair and accusing eyes. But I did not turn. I reached my room, locked the door, and sat on the edge of the bed, trying to calm the frantic beating of my heart. I had come to Ashford Manor believing I could build a life on reason and practicality, that love was unnecessary and sentiment a weakness. But I had been wrong. This house was soaked in love, the desperate, possessive, destructive kind, and it would not let Nathaniel go. And now I was caught in its web, a living woman trying to negotiate with a dead one, and I did not know if there was any way forward that did not end in ruin. But as I lay in the darkness, listening to the wind rattle the window panes, I realized something that frightened me more than ghosts or madness. I was not afraid of Isabel. I was afraid of what I might do to help Nathaniel free himself from her. Because somewhere in the reading of those letters and that journal, somewhere in the understanding of his guilt and his grief, I had begun to feel something I had not expected. Not pity, not duty, but something dangerously close to compassion, and beneath it, the first faint stirrings of something that could become, if I let it, real and unwanted affection. Nathaniel returned to Ashford Manor 3 days later, arriving in the evening as rain lashed against the windows and thunder rolled across the hills. I heard the carriage wheels on the gravel drive and watched from the drawing-room window as he descended, his coat dark with rain, his movements heavy with exhaustion. He did not look up at the house. He paused at the bottom of the steps, his head bowed, and I wondered if he was gathering his courage to enter, or if he was saying a silent prayer that this time she would let him be. Mrs. Graves met him in the entrance hall, and I heard their low voices, hers questioning, his responding in clipped monosyllables. Then his footsteps approached the drawing-room, and the door opened. He stood in the doorway, rain dripping from his coat, his face gaunt and shadowed, and for a long moment we simply looked at each other across the space that separated us. "I thought you would have left," he said finally. His voice was rough, unused. "I stayed," I replied. "I wanted to understand what happened." He closed the door behind him and moved to the fireplace, extending his hands toward the flames as though seeking warmth that went deeper than the skin. I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he held himself as though braced for a blow, and I realized he was afraid. Not of me, but of what I might say, what I might ask, what I might now know about him, and this house, and the woman who would not leave it. I read Isabel's letters, I said quietly, and your journal. I know about the chapel, the laudanum, the inquest. I know she died believing you did not love her. He went very still. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. You had no right. Perhaps not, I said, but I needed to know who she was, who you were, because something spoke through you at that dinner. And if I am to marry you, if I am to live in this house, I must understand what I am walking into. He turned to face me then, and I saw the rawness in his expression, the years of guilt and grief carved into the lines around his mouth and eyes. She was my wife, he said. I should have loved her. I wanted to love her, but I could not give her what she needed. She was fragile, given to dark moods and anxieties, and I thought if I provided stability, security, a good home, it would be enough. I was wrong. She needed more than I knew how to give, and when she began to unravel, I did not know how to save her. I was in London when she died. I was always in London, running from the weight of her unhappiness. And when I returned and found her cold in that chapel, I knew it was my fault. I had failed her utterly. The pain in his voice was so naked, so complete, that I felt something crack open in my chest. This was not the cold, distant man I had agreed to marry. This was someone who had been broken by loss and remorse, who believed himself beyond redemption, and who had sought a practical arrangement because he did not trust himself to attempt anything more. You cannot blame yourself for her death, I said, though even as I spoke the words, I knew they were inadequate. But I do, he replied, and so does she. That is why she will not leave. That is why she speaks through me, why I feel her presence in every room of this house. She is showing me that I cannot escape what I did, that I cannot simply replace her and move forward as though she never existed. And she is right. I do not deserve peace. I do not deserve happiness. I deserve exactly what I have, which is nothing but haunting and guilt. I rose from my chair and crossed the room until I stood before him, close enough to see the exhaustion in his eyes, the silver threading through his dark hair, the fine tremor in his hands. Do you remember what happened at the dinner? I asked. Do you remember speaking in her voice? No, he said. I remember reaching for the wine. And then there is nothing until I woke in my room hours later with Mrs. Graves standing over me. She told me I had taken ill, that the guests had gone, but I knew something else had occurred. I could feel it, the way one feels the residue of a nightmare even after waking. And then your aunt sent word that the engagement was being reconsidered, that my behavior had been unacceptable. I knew then that I had failed again, that I had destroyed the one chance I had to restore some semblance of normalcy to this cursed place. The engagement is not broken, I said. I have not reconsidered. I am still here. He looked at me with something that might have been hope or disbelief or both. Why? He asked. Why would you stay after witnessing that? Because I understand now, I said, and because I will not abandon you to this. The words surprised me as much as they seemed to surprise him. I had not planned to say them. I had not consciously decided to commit myself to this man and his haunted house and his dead wife's fury. But in that moment, standing close enough to see the vulnerability he tried so hard to hide, I knew it was true. I could not walk away. Not from him. Not from this mystery. And not from the strange, unwanted pull I felt toward him. A connection that had nothing to do with practicality or social advantage and everything to do with recognition, as though I saw in him a reflection of my own loneliness and loss. He reached out slowly, tentatively, and touched my hand. His fingers were cold and trembling. You should not bind yourself to me, he said. I am not a good man, Eleanor. I am a coward who ran from his wife's suffering and let her die alone. And I am haunted, truly haunted, in ways I do not understand and cannot control. You deserve better than this. Perhaps, I said, but I have made my choice. We stood there in the firelight, our hands joined, and I felt the weight of that choice settle over me like a mantle. I had entered this engagement seeking safety and respectability, but now I was seeking something else entirely, something dangerous and indefinable, and I knew that whatever came next would test me in ways I could not yet imagine. That night, I could not sleep. The storm continued to rage outside, and the house groaned and shifted around me, alive with sounds that might have been wind or settling timber or something else. I lay in the darkness and thought about Nathaniel, about the guilt that consumed him, about Isabel's desperate need to be remembered and acknowledged. And I thought about the moment when her voice had emerged from his lips, cold and possessive, claiming ownership of a man she could no longer hold except through fear and memory. Just past midnight, I heard it. Footsteps in the hallway outside my door, slow and deliberate, pacing back and forth as though someone were standing guard or working up the courage to enter. I sat up, my heart racing, and lit the candle beside my bed. The footsteps stopped. In the silence that followed, I heard a soft sound, something between a sob and a sigh, and then a voice, barely audible through the wood. "He is mine," it whispered. "He will always be mine." I should have been terrified. I should have pulled the covers over my head and prayed for morning. But instead, I found myself rising from the bed, crossing to the door and opening it. The hallway was empty, lit only by the faint glow of a single lamp at the far end. But the air was freezing, and I could see my breath misting before me. And there, on the floor directly outside my door, lay a white rose, its petals perfect and cold. I picked it up, and as I did, I felt something shift in the house, a presence that pressed against me like a hand on my shoulder. I stood there in my nightdress, holding the rose, and spoke into the darkness. "I am not your enemy," I said. "I did not take him from you. He was already lost when I came here. But I will not leave him to suffer, because you cannot let go. If you have something to say, if there is something you need, then show me. Help me understand." The silence stretched, and then I heard it again, that voice, clearer now, tinged with something that might have been grief or rage or both. "You think you can save him?" it said. "You think you can give him what I could not, but you do not know what he did. You do not know the truth. Then tell me," I said. "Show me the truth." The lamp at the end of the hall flickered and went out, plunging the corridor into complete darkness. I felt the cold intensify, felt the air grow thick and heavy, and for a moment I thought I had pushed too far, that I had challenged something I could not hope to defeat. But then, as quickly as it had come, the presence withdrew, and the temperature returned to normal. The lamp flared back to life, and I was alone again, holding the white rose, my heart pounding. I returned to my room and placed the rose on the windowsill. I did not sleep for the rest of the night. I sat by the window and watched the storm break and the first light of dawn creep across the gardens, and I thought about what Isabel had said. "You do not know what he did. You do not know the truth." What truth? What had Nathaniel done that went beyond neglect and absence? What secret lay buried beneath the official story of a fragile woman driven to self-destruction by melancholy and loneliness? When morning came, I went to find him. He was in the library, staring at the cold fireplace, still wearing yesterday's clothes, his face drawn and pale. He looked up when I entered, and I saw in his eyes that he had not slept either, that he had spent the night wrestling with his own demons. I sat across from him and told him everything. The footsteps, the voice, the rose, the words Isabel had spoken through the door. He listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with each detail, and when I finished, he was silent for a long time. Finally, he spoke. "There is something I have not told you," he said. "Something I have told no one. The night Isabel died, she left a note. The inquest never saw it. I burned it before anyone else could read it. But I remember every word. She wrote that she knew I had never loved her, that she had been a means to an end, a fortune to secure my estate, and she wrote that she forgave me for that, but she could not forgive me for the other woman." My breath caught. "What other woman?" "There was no other woman," he said quickly. "That is what I told myself, what I have always told myself. But Isabel believed there was. She had convinced herself that my absences, my coldness, were because I loved someone else, someone I had known before her, someone I could not have. And in her final letter, she wrote that she would not let me find happiness with this phantom rival, that she would make certain I remembered her, that I would never be free to love again. She wrote that if she could not have me, no one would. I stared at him, understanding dawning cold and terrible. She did not kill herself out of despair. I said slowly. She killed herself to bind you to her, to ensure you would be haunted. He nodded, his face a mask of anguish. And it worked. For 2 years I have been unable to move forward, unable to feel anything but guilt and the weight of her presence. I thought marrying you would break the cycle, that bringing life back into this house would weaken her hold. But I was wrong. She is stronger now than ever, and I fear that by bringing you here, I have put you in danger. I reached across the space between us and took his hand, and this time I did not let go. Then we face her together, I said. We find out what she truly wants, what will release her, and we give it to her, or we make her understand that she cannot have you anymore. But I will not let her win, Nathaniel. I will not let her destroy what we might become. He looked at me, and in his eyes I saw something shift, something that might have been the beginning of hope or the first stirrings of something deeper. And I realized that I was no longer speaking of a practical arrangement, no longer protecting my own interests. I was speaking of us, of a future I wanted, despite the impossibility of it all. And that terrified me more than any ghost. We began our search in the places Isabel had loved most, the private corners of the house where her presence lingered strongest. Nathaniel led me to her sitting room, the door I had seen him hesitate before during my first visit, and we entered together, our hands still joined as though neither of us dared let go. The room had been left exactly as it was the day she died, a shrine to a woman who could not rest. Her embroidery sat half-finished on the settee, her perfume bottles stood on the dressing table, and her books lined the shelves, their spines uncracked and pristine. She never read them, Nathaniel said quietly. She collected them because she thought a lady should have a library, but I never once saw her open a single volume. She preferred to sit by the window and watch the road, waiting for me to return. Sometimes I think she spent years of her life simply waiting. I moved through the room, touching the objects that had belonged to her, trying to understand the woman through the things she had left behind. But everything felt hollow, performative, as though Isabel herself had been performing a role she did not fully inhabit. And then I saw it, tucked behind a row of novels on the highest shelf, a small wooden box with a tarnished silver clasp. I reached for it, and the moment my fingers closed around it, the temperature in the room plummeted. Nathaniel felt it too. He moved to my side as I brought the box down, and together we opened it. Inside were letters, but not the ones I had read in his study. These were addressed to Isabel, written in a bold, masculine hand that was not Nathaniel's. I pulled out the first and began to read, and with each line, a new understanding took shape. They were love letters, passionate, reckless declarations from a man named Thomas Whitmore, a physician who had treated Isabel during one of her nervous episodes before her marriage. He wrote of stolen moments, of conversations that stretched into the night, of a connection he had never felt with anyone else. He wrote that he loved her, that he wanted to marry her, that he would wait for her no matter how long it took. And in the final letter, dated just weeks before Isabel's wedding to Nathaniel, he begged her not to go through with the marriage, to choose love over duty, to run away with him if necessary. She never answered him, Nathaniel said, reading over my shoulder. Or if she did, he never sent her response, but she kept his letters. She married me and brought them into this house and kept them hidden like a secret treasure. She loved him, I said, not you. She married you for your title and your wealth, just as you married her for hers. But her heart belonged to someone else, and she never stopped mourning that loss. Nathaniel sank into the chair by the window, his face ashen. All this time, I thought I had failed her because I could not love her enough. But she did not want my love. She wanted his. And when she could not have it, when she realized she had trapped herself in a marriage of convenience for the sake of social advancement, she blamed me. She made me the villain of her story because it was easier than admitting she had made her own choice, that she had sacrificed love for status, and regretted it every day of her short life. I knelt beside him, still holding the letters. This changes everything, I said. She did not die because you failed to love her. She died because she could not forgive herself for choosing security over passion. And now she is trying to keep you from doing the same thing, from finding any measure of happiness with someone else, because she believes you do not deserve what she denied herself. Then how do we free her? He asked. How do we make her understand that her choices were her own, that I am not responsible for her unhappiness? We find Thomas Whitmore, I said. We learn what became of him, whether he still lives, whether he ever knew what happened to her. And we bring that truth into this house, into her presence, and make her face it. It took 2 days to locate him. Nathaniel sent inquiries through his solicitor, and we learned that Dr. Thomas Whitmore had established a practice in a small village in Kent, that he had never married, and that he was still alive. Nathaniel wrote to him, explaining that he had been married to Isabel, that she had passed, and that there were matters concerning her estate that required discussion. It was not the truth, but it was enough to secure an agreement to meet. We traveled to Kent on a gray morning, the landscape bleak and windswept, the sky heavy with the promise of rain. Dr. Whitmore received us in his modest home adjacent to his surgery, a man in his early 40s with kind eyes and hair that had begun to gray at the temples. When Nathaniel introduced me as his betrothed, I saw the flash of surprise and then understanding cross the doctor's face. "So she is truly gone," he said quietly. "I heard rumors, but I could not bring myself to believe them." "She died 2 years ago," Nathaniel replied, "by her own hand, and I have spent those 2 years trying to understand why. I hope you can help me." Dr. Whitmore poured tea with unsteady hands and told us the story we had already pieced together from the letters. But hearing it spoken aloud made it real in a way the written words had not. He had loved Isabel desperately, had believed she loved him in return, had been shattered when she accepted Nathaniel's proposal instead. He had written to her, begging her to reconsider, but she had never replied. He had attended the wedding from a distance, standing at the back of the church, and had seen the moment she had turned to look at him before taking her vows. He had seen the tears in her eyes, the hesitation, and then the resolve as she turned back to Nathaniel and spoke the words that bound her to a life she did not want. "I should have fought harder for her," he said. "I should have made her see that love was worth more than a title. But I was young and proud, and I thought if she truly loved me, she would choose me without persuasion. I was wrong, and by the time I understood that, it was too late." "Did she ever contact you after the marriage?" I asked. "Once," he said, "a year after the wedding. She sent a letter saying she had made a terrible mistake, that she thought of me every day, that she wished she could undo her choice. But she said there was no way back, that divorce was impossible, that she was trapped. She asked if I still loved her, if I still thought of her. I wrote back immediately, telling her that I had never stopped loving her, that I would wait for her forever if necessary. But I never heard from her again. And then, a year later, I learned she had died. I have spent every day since wondering if my letter reached her, if she knew before she died that she was still loved, or if she died believing herself alone and forgotten." Nathaniel stood abruptly and walked to the window, his shoulders rigid. "She knew," he said harshly. "She received your letter. I found it among her things after her death. She knew you still loved her, and it changed nothing. She still chose death over the life she had." Dr. Whitmore's face crumpled. "Then I failed her too. We all failed her. She needed someone to save her, and none of us could." I felt a profound sadness settle over the room, the weight of 3 lives twisted by pride and fear and social convention. But beneath the sadness, I felt something else, a clarity that had been missing. Isabel had not been a victim of Nathaniel's neglect alone. She had been a victim of her own choices, her own inability to fight for what she wanted, and her own refusal to forgive herself or anyone else for the compromises she had made. We left Dr. Whitmore's house as the rain began to fall and returned to Ashford Manor in silence. Nathaniel stared out the carriage window, lost in thought, and I sat beside him, feeling the shape of a plan forming in my mind. That evening, after dinner, I asked him to come with me to Isabel's sitting room. He hesitated, but I took his hand and led him there, and together we stood among her things. "Isabel," I said into the stillness, "I know you are here. I know you are listening." We went to see Thomas Whitmore. He told us that he loved you, that he never stopped loving you, that he wrote to you and told you so before you died. You knew you were loved, Isabel. You knew there was someone who would have waited forever for you. But you did not choose him. You chose pride and fear and anger instead. And now you are punishing Nathaniel for choices that were always yours to make. You must let him go. You must let us both go." The room remained silent, but I felt the air thicken, felt the familiar cold begin to creep in from the corners. Nathaniel stood rigid beside me, his hand gripping mine so tightly it hurt, and I knew he felt it too, the gathering of something vast and angry. "Please," Nathaniel said, his voice breaking. "Please, Isabel. I am sorry I could not give you what you needed. I am sorry I was not the man you wanted, but I cannot live in this purgatory anymore. I cannot let your death define the rest of my life. You must release me. You must release both of us." For a moment, nothing happened, and then the windows blew open with a crash, and the wind howled through the room, scattering papers and knocking over bottles, and I heard her voice, no longer a whisper, but a scream that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "You think you can have what I could not," she shrieked. "You think you can love each other and be happy while I am forgotten, while I am nothing? I will not allow it. I will not let you erase me." "You are not forgotten," I shouted over the wind. "But you must forgive yourself, Isabel. You must forgive yourself for choosing wrong, for being afraid, for being human. And you must forgive us for being alive when you are not. We did not take anything from you. You gave it away, and you must make peace with that." The wind stopped as suddenly as it had begun. The windows hung open, rain blowing in, and the room fell utterly silent. I waited, my heart pounding, for another attack, another manifestation of rage. But instead, I heard something different. A sound so soft I almost missed it. Sobbing. Quiet, broken, the sound of grief finally allowed to express itself. And then I saw her. Not a shadow this time, but a figure standing by the window, translucent and pale, her blonde hair loose around her shoulders, her face young and beautiful, and infinitely sad. She looked at Nathaniel, and then at me, and her lips moved. "I am so tired," she whispered. "I am so tired of being angry. I just wanted to be loved. I just wanted someone to choose me." "We did choose you," Nathaniel said, tears streaming down his face. "Thomas chose you. I would have chosen you if you had let me see you, truly see you. But you hid yourself away, built walls, pushed everyone away, and then blamed us for not breaking through them. I am sorry, Isabel. I am sorry for all of it. But you must go now. You must rest." She looked at him for a long moment, and then she smiled, a sad, wistful expression that transformed her face into something almost peaceful. "Tell him," she said. "Tell Thomas that I loved him, that I always loved him, that I was a coward, but I loved him. I will, I promised. I will tell him." She turned to me then, and her eyes held mine. "You are braver than I was," she said. "Do not waste it. Do not let fear make you small." And then she was gone, fading like mist in sunlight, and the room was warm again, and ordinary, and empty of everything except Nathaniel and me, and the rain falling softly beyond the open windows. We stood there for a long time, holding each other, neither of us speaking, both of us understanding that something fundamental had shifted. The haunting was over. Isabel had released her hold, and now we were left with the question of what we would build from the ruins of all this pain and loss. Later that night, as we sat together in the library, Nathaniel spoke the words I had been both hoping for and fearing. "I do not want a practical marriage anymore," he said. "I do not want an arrangement based on convenience and mutual advantage. I want to try for something real, Eleanor. I want to know if what I feel for you, what I have begun to feel for you, can grow into something worthy of both of us. Will you give me that chance? Will you let me try to love you properly?" I looked at this man who had been a stranger mere weeks ago, who had become something far more complex and necessary, and I knew my answer. "Yes," I said. "Yes, I will." And for the first time since I had entered Ashford Manor, I felt not fear or unease, but hope. We were married in the spring, 6 months after Isabel's spirit had finally found peace. The wedding was small and private, held in the village church rather than the chapel on the estate, which we had decided to restore but not use for our ceremony. I wore a gown of ivory silk, simple and elegant, with orange blossoms in my hair, and Nathaniel stood beside me in a dark suit, his eyes bright with emotion I had learned to recognize and treasure. When he spoke his vows, his voice did not waver, and when he placed the ring on my finger, his hand was steady and warm. The months between Isabel's departure and our wedding had been a time of careful discovery, of learning to trust what was growing between us. Nathaniel courted me properly, not with grand gestures or expensive gifts, but with small acts of consideration that revealed the man beneath the guilt and grief. He brought me books he thought I would enjoy and sat with me while I read them aloud. He walked with me through the gardens as they came back to life after winter, pointing out the first crocuses and snowdrops, telling me stories of his childhood spent exploring these grounds. He asked me about my father, about my own losses, and he listened without judgment when I spoke of the shame and isolation that had defined my years since the scandal. We talked about Isabel often, not to keep her present, but to understand what her haunting had taught us. She had shown us what happened when people chose safety over honesty, when they built their lives on foundations of fear and pretense. We were determined not to repeat those mistakes. When doubt crept in, when old patterns of withdrawal threatened to return, we spoke of them openly. It was not always easy. There were evenings when Nathaniel grew distant, lost in memories he could not articulate, and mornings when I woke convinced that I was not enough, that he would always compare me to the woman he had failed. But we learned to reach for each other in those moments rather than retreat, and slowly, carefully, we built something real. Before the wedding, we traveled once more to Kent. Dr. Whitmore received us with the same quiet kindness, though I saw the question in his eyes when he noted the betrothal ring on my finger. We sat in his parlor, and I told him what had happened, how Isabel's spirit had manifested, how we had uncovered the truth of her hidden love, and how in the end she had asked us to deliver a message. She wanted you to know that she loved you, I said gently, that she always loved you, that she was afraid, and she made a choice she regretted every day of her life, but the love was real. She wanted you to know that. He wept then, silently, tears streaming down his face, and Nathaniel reached across and gripped his shoulder in a gesture of solidarity and shared grief. When Dr. Whitmore finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "Thank you," he said. "Thank you for giving me that. I have spent years wondering if I imagined the connection between us, if I built something beautiful in my mind that never truly existed, but it was real, and she remembered. That is enough. That has to be enough." We left him standing in his doorway, a man who had carried love for 2 decades without hope of reciprocation, and I thought about the different forms courage could take. Isabel had not been brave enough to choose love over convention, but Dr. Whitmore had been brave enough to keep loving her despite everything. And now Nathaniel and I were trying to be brave enough to build something new from the wreckage of past mistakes, to honor what had been lost without being imprisoned by it. Our wedding night was spent at Ashford Manor, but the house no longer felt like a mausoleum. We had opened every room, aired out the curtains, brought in fresh flowers and new furnishings. Mrs. Graves, who had served the family for 30 years, told me she had not heard laughter in these halls since Nathaniel was a boy, and that it was good to hear it again. The servants seemed lighter, less burdened, as though they too had been released from the weight of Isabel's unhappiness. Nathaniel carried me over the threshold with a tenderness that made my heart ache, and we stood together in the entrance hall, the same hall where I had first seen him possessed by his dead wife's rage, and he kissed me slowly, thoroughly, with none of the reserve that had characterized our early interactions. "This is our home now," he said. "Yours and mine. We will fill it with light and life and whatever comes next. No more ghosts, no more guilt, just us." I had not expected passion. I had entered this engagement believing I could live without it, that companionship and mutual respect would be sufficient. But I had been wrong. What I felt for Nathaniel was not the desperate, possessive love that had destroyed Isabel, but something steadier and more sustaining. A love built on knowledge and choice and the daily decision to see and be seen. And that night, in the room we would share as husband and wife, I discovered that safety and passion were not opposing forces, that one could choose wisely and still feel desire, that practicality and romance could exist in the same breath. The months that followed were not without challenge. There were moments when I walked through the house and felt an echo of Isabel's presence, not threatening but melancholy, a reminder of what had been lost. There were nights when Nathaniel woke from nightmares, reaching for me in the dark, needing reassurance that I was real and present and choosing to stay. And there were days when I questioned whether I had made the right decision, whether I had bound myself to a man and a place too damaged to ever fully heal. But there were also mornings when I woke to find Nathaniel watching me sleep, his expression soft with wonder, as though he could not quite believe his good fortune. There were afternoons in the garden, planting roses together, our hands in the soil, planning for seasons we would share. There were evenings in the library, reading by the fire, comfortable in silence, knowing that words were not always necessary. And there were nights when he held me and whispered that he loved me, that I had saved him, that he would spend the rest of his life being worthy of the chance I had given him. I told him often that he had saved me too, that before I came to Ashford Manor, I had been living half a life defined by loss and shame, unable to imagine a future that held anything more than survival. He had given me purpose, had shown me that I was capable of courage, that I could face the supernatural and the social and emerge not diminished, but enlarged. We had saved each other, I said, and that was the truest kind of partnership. A year after our wedding, I discovered I was with child. The news filled me with joy and terror in equal measure, and I went to the chapel, which we had restored and consecrated, to sit in the quiet and think about what it meant to bring new life into a house that had known so much death. I thought about Isabel, about the children she might have had if she had lived, if she had chosen differently, if she had been brave enough to fight for her own happiness. And I made a silent promise to her, wherever she was, that I would not waste the gift I had been given, that I would love fiercely and honestly, that I would teach my children to choose courage over fear. When I told Nathaniel, he held me for a long time without speaking, and when he finally pulled back, I saw tears in his eyes. I am afraid, he admitted. Afraid I will fail this child the way I failed Isabel. Afraid I do not know how to be the father a child deserves. You will not fail, I said, because you are not the same man you were then, because we will face this together, and because you already know the cost of silence and distance, and you will not repeat those mistakes. He nodded slowly, and I saw the determination settle over him, the choice to believe me, to trust in what we had built. We would not be perfect parents. We would make mistakes, struggle with doubt, face challenges we could not yet imagine. But we would face them together, with honesty and love, and that would have to be enough. The child, a daughter, was born the following spring on a morning of soft rain and birdsong. We named her Grace, for the undeserved gift we had been given, for the mercy that had allowed us to move beyond our past mistakes. She had Nathaniel's dark hair and my eyes, and when I held her for the first time, I felt a completeness I had not known was possible. This was what Isabel had wanted and never found, what Dr. Whitmore had dreamed of and been denied. And we had it, not because we were more deserving, but because we had been willing to do the hard work of forgiveness and truth. As Grace grew, the house grew with her, filling with laughter and chaos and the particular joy that children bring. The darkness that had once pervaded every corner retreated, not erased, but transformed into something gentler, a reminder rather than a prison. Sometimes, when I walked through the halls late at night, I thought I caught the scent of white roses, faint and fleeting, and I chose to believe it was Isabel's way of acknowledging what we had built, of giving her blessing to the life that bloomed in the space her death had left. I never forgot that I had agreed to a practical union, that I had come to this house seeking safety rather than love. But life, I had learned, rarely respects our careful plans. It offers us what we need rather than what we think we want, and if we are wise and brave enough to accept the gift, we may find that we have been given something far more precious than we dared to hope for. Nathaniel and I grew old together in that house, watching our daughter become a woman of strength and independence, welcoming grandchildren who ran through the gardens and filled the rooms with light. And on quiet evenings, when the two of us sat by the fire with our hands entwined, I sometimes thought about the woman I had been, the one who believed that love was a luxury she could not afford, and I thanked her for her courage. She had walked into this haunted house and faced down ghosts and fear and the weight of impossible choices, and she had emerged not broken, but whole, not diminished, but expanded, not alone, but beloved. I am Eleanor Ashford now, and this is my story. It is a story of ghosts and grief, of courage and redemption, of love found in the most unlikely of places. And it is a story that reminds me, every single day, that the dead cannot hold us unless we let them, that we are always free to choose differently, to love bravely, to build a life worthy of the name. Isabel could not do it, but I could, and that has made all the difference.